For Senate Appropriations Committee, March 29th, upon adjournment, Senator Guru.
Here.
Senator Hicks. Here. Senator Kinski.
Here.
Senator Steinmetz. Here. Chairman Perkins. Here. You have a quorum.
District loans. On a re-referral, we recognize and we'd like to welcome you, Representative Hunt, on this bill. Thank you for coming up. So we recognize there's not an appropriation, but we wanted to understand what this did and the effect it has on particularly some of the funds that we've got out there. And so what we typically like you to do is just give us a really 30,000 foot, really brief thumbnail sketch of what the bill does theoretically, and then take us into the fiscal implications of what your bill does. And thank you, Representative. Go ahead.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. Mr. Chairman, the essence of House Bill 188 is that it simply would give irrigation districts around the state another avenue, another alternative option when it comes to looking around for funding for major rehabilitation and maintenance projects. Mr. Chairman, this came about after along with several other bills after the 2019 Goshen irrigation canal collapse, and the costs associated with that were obviously quite substantial. But Mr. Chairman, the long story short in this is that we're simply allowing another avenue of opportunity. So currently, there are certain funds within that are overseen by SLIB, but when it comes to water, it's mainly it's constrained to drinking water. The Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, and so all this is doing is saying that this would be another location for money to be loaned if that were necessary for specific projects. And so, Mr. Chairman, I could, if I may, I'd point you on the committee to page 2 of the bill is obviously the meat of it. But the couple things I would point out is that we, on the House side, changed the language on line 15 of page 2 from may to shall in the sentence starting that the board shall require an irrigation district to apply for other grant or loan program prior to authorizing a loan under the subsection. So this is to clarify that this is effectively a loan of last resort. And obviously they can go to the Water Development Commission, they can shop around, see what's available for federal funding, but that's, again, Mr. Chairman, part of the issue was that there was not much in the way of federal funds available either through FEMA or anything else. But we did tighten it up with that language, and then also up at the top of the page again, on page 2, on line 2, page 2, we specified to say for replacement or major maintenance projects of diversion transmission distribution system. So, Mr. Chairman, that's the broad scope of the bill, and I would try to answer any questions.
Okay. Thank you. Any particular questions for Representative Hunt? Senator Steinmetz, did you have some things you wanted to add?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to kind of quickly go over what the loan fund does. So on the page that I handed out to you, kind of the middle, one of the bullet points, the current statute addressing capital construction loans in 16-1-111, the aggregate for all outstanding loans is the 400 million. The aggregate.
Senator Steinmetz?
Yes.
And that 400 million is a loan out of, if I remember right, it's out of the corpus or excuse me, out of the permanent trust fund.
Permanent trust fund, Mr. Okay. Chairman, that is correct. And the aggregate sum of the loans are 200 million for infrastructure projects and 200 million for road and street projects. The current state loan and investment board capital construction loan statistics, 7 loans are currently under the program. They range from 5 years to 25 years and interest rates from 1 to 2.5%. The amount of loans range from 114,000 to 20 million. And the current available funding in infrastructure is 171 million, road and street 200 million, and Osley can absorb the increased administrative burden. So that just a little overview of how the program is standing right now, Mr. Chairman.
And so that would tell us that we have less than $30 million in outstanding loans out of the 200 million for infrastructure. Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Vice President.
question on the interest on these. Do these comport with the existing loans that they have? And if not, where did this scheme of the interest rate come from?
Go ahead, Representative Hunt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Senator Hicks, yes, that is my understanding that the loan rate specified here of on line 4 of 1% plus the 75,000 for each year of the loan in term of excess of 5 years. That's just conforming language to the currently accepted loan rates. So
If you
at the
remember,
U.S. Treasury.
and if you remember, this was, 2 or 3 years ago was the Build Wyoming that set this up, and it set it up the 200 million for infrastructure, 200 million for roads and streets. And it set that, if you look under that progressive interest rate, that was part of that legislation. So that's part of the existing statute, that it's at least 1%, and then it's a 0.25%, 3/4% for each year that it exceeds 5 years. So it's basically the term of the loan is just simply calculable, and as you can see, it ends up in a 2.5% interest rate, which used to seem incredibly low, but now doesn't seem that bad considering where interest rates are now. So,
And the maximum is a 25-year term.
yeah, 25-year term. Yeah.
I'd like to borrow 25 for 25 years.
Well, just be a political subdivision, and you can have it. You can make an application.
Form my own town.
Any other? Thank you. And so, I mean, I guess the other question I would have is, are we aware of anybody who was ready, willing, or who is eager to apply for this, or is this just kind of prophylactic to kind of prepare in case there's another situation like we had with the Goshen Irrigation District?
Mr. Chairman, I think off the top of my head, I don't think I could point to anyone in specifically who would today be interested in applying for this. But I think that just in general, the existence of this bill speaks to the aging state of our water development infrastructure. And I mean, I would add that whether that's in irrigation districts or municipalities, either way. But Mr. Chairman, in my discussions with fellow representatives and colleagues, nobody's really brought that forward. Nobody's particularly said, hey, this would be great for the folks back home in my district, my community. But I guess the closest we got to that discussion was the good Senate Chairman of Agriculture, Senator Boner, did say, that was in language on page 2, line 2 and 3, that we're talking about diversion and transmission and distribution systems. Of course, he was, I guess, somewhat hopeful. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but that would potentially apply to dams and other infrastructure like that, because LaPuelle is out there as an issue that's kind of hanging over a lot of people's heads. So.
And my understanding is that the purpose of this is to be a loan of last resort. And as I read the bill, the only place I come to that conclusion is on line 15, where it says the board shall. I think you pointed out that was a change that was made in the House, that the board shall require an irrigation district to apply for other grant or loan programs prior to authorizing one under this subsection. So is that I think that's the intent of that section, is to make this a loan of last resort.
Mr. Chairman, yes, sir. That's exactly the intent of that.
And then, okay, thank you. Any other questions, members?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Cook, Mr. Vice Chair.
so Representative Hunt, as you know, usually these things are strung together with 2 to 3 different sources. So you might be able to get a grant here and something else over there, but then you need a match. Is it your intent that the loan could be used as the match?
Mr. Chairman, yes, I do think so. I mean, I think that there's nothing that would restrict it in this language from that being used as such.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions? All right, is there anybody that's out there to give public comment on this?
See how good I am? I
There is
managed to
one.
get
All right, let's go. Oh, there they are.
Director Scoggins in the room as
Oh,
well.
Director Scoggin, you're with us. Hi, welcome.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. I have Amanda Sewell with me. She's our Assistant Director for our Administrative and Financial Services Division. Just briefly, Mr. Chairman, this all came about, or at least my understanding of how it all came about was we had a meeting with Goshen Irrigation District, the governor and his folks, the treasurer's office, the Secretary of State. We were looking for additional funding options for Goshen Irrigation District after the emergency tunnel collapse that they had. Now, we were a little bit lucky with GID from the standpoint that they were able to qualify for some funding, I think $4 million in loans from the Clean Water SRF loan program, and $3 million of that was principal forgiveness. They've qualified for another, I think, 378 for some reclamation that's occurring as a result of that. But as we were looking through some of these funding situations, we realized that there really aren't a lot of pots of money, if you will, for which irrigation districts can look at for infrastructure. And we realize that there are some crumbling infrastructures other than just GID in the state as well. The SRF program, the Clean Water SRF and Drinking Water SRF programs, while they do have a fair amount of funding in each of those pots, those are very specific programs. They're very nuanced. And so not every irrigation district would likely be able to qualify for those. So we were looking for other situations. It was suggested that perhaps through this capital construction loan program, that it might be an opportunity, sort of a way of last resort after they had perhaps sought loans through Clean Water SRF, perhaps Drinking Water SRF, perhaps FEMA. We are also the opinion, I was just talking with Amanda, we believe that that these funds under the capital construction program could potentially be used as matches for FEMA loans and other larger loan programs. So we just wanted to make that point. Also, with respect to impacts to the agency, OSLI can absorb, we believe, any additional administrative burden. We may have to do some rule revision, but otherwise, we don't think that would be too bad. And we're just mainly here if there are other questions about the capital construction program as it stands today. So Amanda, did I miss anything? With that, Mr. Chairman, we would stand for questions.
Thank you. Is there anybody have any direct questions for Director Scoggin?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Vice Chair.
Director, thank you. Tell me, what were the specific facts of GID that an irrigation district was able to qualify for a clean water and drinking water SRF? What were the facts that were unique or rare in this situation that other districts would not be able to so qualify?
Go ahead, Director.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, I believe that there were a couple of different issues. There were some improvements to like green, Amanda, can you help me out? Conservation. There were efficiencies that were going to be built into the irrigation system as a result of some of the changes. What else, Amanda?
Was it non-point water?
And there may have been some water quality things. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I would have to go back and look at all that, but they were related to efficiencies in distribution of water, water conservation, maybe what we call some green projects, which improve water quality or improve, like I said, efficiencies of the system.
Any follow-up, Senator?
No, if you don't overwhelm me with too much information, just a brief email would be helpful. Thank you.
Anyone else have any questions for Director Scoggin? Director Scoggin, I do have one question. So if you look at the engrossed version of the bill, and I don't know if you have that in front of you, I see you reaching for a paper. So I'm looking at lines 15 through 8 through 17, which is kind of this length of page 2. Thank you. That the board shall require an irrigation district to apply for other grant or loan programs prior to authorizing the loan under this subsection. I mean, the point of that is to be a grant of last, this would be a grant or loan of last resort, resort. And I'm just wondering, as you look at that, how do you interpret that as far as how your office would advise the board with respect to a loan or a grant that came before you for this program?
Mr. Chairman, I think based on our experience with GID, what we would look at would be, have they applied for, could they even qualify for clean water SRF, drinking water SRF, any of our other programs? I do believe there are some funds available through the Water Development Office, as well as perhaps FEMA loans. So I think we would have to work with them to see USDA. There could be some other ones like that. And I think what we would have to do is sit down with them and communicate with respect to, what's the situation? What are the funds for? Are there available programs that we administer or funding through Water Development, USDA, FEMA, anything else? And I think perhaps after we'd satisfied ourselves that we're not aware of other opportunities, that at that point in time, we would look at what was needed here and what was being requested here.
And thank you, Director. And if I could, stay tuned for just a minute. I've got a question for the Vice President, who is very, very familiar with water in the state. And as we look at irrigation districts, some parts of the state have their irrigation systems and their irrigation infrastructure in pretty decent shape. My recollection is from my years, it's been a number of years since I was on the Select Water Committee, that there are other parts of the state that really, the irrigation infrastructure is really in pretty tough. And I'm just wondering, has to your recollection, Mr. Vice Chair, Mr. Vice President, is there an inventory that the Water Development Commission has with respect to irrigation infrastructure and where that's at, and any kind of estimate about failures or other issues that might come up with respect to irrigation infrastructure?
Mr. Chairman, the answer is yes and no. And so, no, not on those large private infrastructure or irrigation. They're not irrigation districts, but large private projects that at any time could, under the laws of the state of Wyoming, form a district. Some of those are probably not in the best shape. There was a discussion last year with the Joint Ag Committee that the Water Development Office does put out a survey that asks many of the questions you just asked. How old is your infrastructure? What's the anticipated life expectancy? Do you have any that's going to need some remediation or funding into the future? So they're trying to create that database. To participate in water development programs, you have to provide a survey every year for primary irrigation districts and some of the other, like the Water Conservancy districts. So they're trying to build that database a little broader right now. So it's really a mixed bag, what you find when you go around the state. A lot of the more organized irrigation districts typically are underneath the Bureau of Reclamation projects. I think the estimate was somewhere near $1 billion of aging infrastructure. Now that may mean that it's got 10 years or 15 years worth of life expectancy, but the answer is our irrigation infrastructure around the state is not keeping up with the maintenance schedule commensurate to the cost of replacement. And part of that's just the cost of replacement. And so it's something that I think this program is probably going to be needed. Where I see this program coming in more than anything else is, if we just use the example of GID. Some of these programs, water development in particular, they've got a rigorous regimented schedule of when you can apply, when the commission reviews that stuff, all of those issues. So twice in the last 6 years, we've had 2 instances with both GID and Riverton Irrigation District, when we had the floods up there in 2016 that substantially damaged a lot of infrastructure. And they had to turn at that point in time to private banks to try to get money just to stop the bleeding, keep it from washing out the town of Riverton, or significant crop loss. And that's where I would think that this program could potentially come into play, is under those emergency type situations where you need to do something tomorrow. If SLIB was to convene, you just can't get through the water development process that quick. It's just not that nimble. Bureau of Reclamation is the same way, maybe FEMA. I know we looked at that from both of those projects. I don't remember what happened with Riverton, but usually those dollars come in afterwards. So I would anticipate under these scenarios where you would see this as somebody would come out for that first money out to borrow that money just to get them to stabilize that infrastructure so they can start into the engineering and the design. And I'm assuming that that would be eligible under this program.
Well, and so, I guess going back to you, Director Scogan, could you hear the Vice President talking?
Mr. Chairman, we could hear most of it, yes.
Okay, and so, I'm just wondering about this. Does this program, or when we have this, does this in some respects create a little bit of a perverse incentive? Because ultimately what happens is this seems to be available when there's a failure, or particularly a catastrophic failure. And obviously it'd be much better if we had maintenance ahead of time. But I'm just wondering about this. I mean, I could see a situation where you could go through this $200 million in the state in a pretty short order. Then what we're left with is we have loans that they're collateralized, but the state doesn't want to own an aging near or an infrastructure that has collapsed and now been repaired. I don't think the state has any interest in owning that. I mean, at some point, if we do this, do we need to watch this and develop some kind of loss reserve or something that repays the corpus of the PMTF if there are bad loans made under this program?
Mr. Chairman, it's my understanding that there is a loss reserve in the statute itself. That's what Amanda just told me, but I hear your point that, yeah, we could certainly go through the $200 million very quickly if, to pay for aging infrastructure and that sort of thing. So we would definitely have to advise the SLIB of, because there are other, obviously, infrastructure projects that other entities may wish to apply for and utilize that money too. So we would have to be careful that it wasn't sort of completely commandeered by irrigation districts.
Right. I mean, and ultimately, if you did this, it might be a great opportunity for the state treasurer to go out and package those and sell them off as bonds, and that thereby indemnify you can indemnify to some degree the PMTF. Because I mean, I look at that, 200 million is 1/5 of the current unrealized capital gains of the PMTF. So I mean, it's just, it's a good program, but I mean, it's just one of those things that it could get out of hand really quick if the wrong chain of events occurred. So anyway, just my musings, but anyway, thank you, Director. Appreciate it. Senator Steinmetz, did you have something like that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just appreciate the good vetting of this bill. I think we all trust our state land and investment board as well, that would be a part of approving these loans, and they keep their eye on the ball pretty handily. So I think we can trust their decision-making as they review these actions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
No argument from me. About your comments about the SLI, I have lots of confidence in the SLI. So now what I don't have confidence in is Mother Nature. So anyway, I'm
Mr.
sorry to
Chairman.
take up the committee's time. I just,
Well, I
appreciate
found
that.
your musings amusing. I have a question.
Go ahead, Mr. Vice Chairman.
Ms. Scoggin, on these clean water and drinking water revolving funds, remind me, I think ultimately the source of that is federal dollars, correct?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Kinsky, there is a state match involved in that. It's how much?
20%.
About 20%. So there is a state match, but yes, it's largely federal dollars.
Okay. Well, I'll be interested when I get your memo to see how far we can push the irrigation districts on the clean water funding. Imaginative grant making, there might be more latitude there than we know, because some of the condition that she mentioned, I think probably almost any irrigation project, you're going to conserve water, you're going to end up being more efficient in the use of the water, and it'll be interesting to see how we might leverage those funds. Thank you, those are my musings, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more musings from the committee? All right, thank you. We'll go ahead and, anything else, Director Scholes, any parting comments?
Mr. Chairman, no, not at this time. As I mentioned, I'm happy to get a memo to the committee and to Senator Kinsky with the particulars of clean water SRF and even drinking water SRF. It's been our goal to try to steer more projects to those pots of money, as we don't always have the interest in those that we'd like, but noting that there are a lot of sort of ins and outs and emergencies versus non-emergencies and all those sort of facts that have to come to light in order to determine eligibility of all that. But anyway, I look forward to providing that information to the committee.
Well, thank you, Director. Thank you for your time this afternoon.
Thank you.
All right, we'll go ahead and, any parting comments, Representative Hunt?
Not that I can think of, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Committee, we'll go ahead and close off public comment. There is not an appropriation, so what's your pleasure?
Move the bill.
And move the bill, or just want, is there move the bill, or is it you want to move for a due pass recommendation, I'm assuming? Okay. All right. Is there any further discussion? All's in favor? Let's call the roll.
Thank you. On House Bill 188. Senator Guru. Senator Hicks.
Aye.
Senator Kinsky.
Aye.
Senator Steinmetz. Chairman Perkins. Chairman Perkins.
I guess.
5 ayes.
Thank you, Representative Hunt. And you've got this on the floor, Senator Steinmetz? All right. You've picked a good tag team member, Representative Hunt. All right. Any other business to come before the